She never saved anyone. My sister didn't earn that Purple Heart. She sat in a tactical communications bunker 3 miles behind the ridge while real soldiers bled, and she let her own team sergeant die to cover her own coward's skin. My older brother, Major Julian Thorne, roared those words into the wireless microphone, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the Redwood Ballroom at the St. Clair Hotel in Savannah, Georgia. 82 distinguished guests, retired admirals, wealthy defense donors, county officials, and my own family froze in stunned silence, their forks hovering over roast prime rib and their eyes wide with dark curiosity. Julian stood at the flower-draped podium beside my mother's polished rosewood casket, his dress blue uniform immaculate, his gold aviator wings gleaming under the massive crystal chandeliers. He turned slowly, pointing a rigid, accusatory finger directly at where I sat in row 3. I wasn't wearing a cocktail dress. I was wearing my formal Army service uniform, the brass buttons polished to a high sheen, my dark hair pulled into a neat regulation bun, and the Purple Heart pinned over my left breast alongside a combat action badge. "Look at her!" Julian sneered, his voice dropping from a grieving son's eulogy to a prosecutor's final condemnation. She came to our mother's memorial wearing medals she probably ordered off the internet. After 3 years of hiding behind fake trauma claims, freeloading off the Thorne family estate, she has the nerve to show up here and pretend she's a hero. Security, confiscate her military credentials and escort this fraud off the property. My stepmother, Evelyn, clutched her pearl necklace and let out a dramatic, shuddering sob, burying her face into my father's chest. My father, Colonel Robert Thorne, retired, didn't say a single word in my defense. He simply stared at me with cold, disappointed eyes, his jaw set like iron, muttering loud enough for the front rows to hear. "You've dragged our name through enough mud, Clara. Get out before I have the police remove you." They expected me to burst into tears, duck my head, and run out into the pouring Savannah rain. They believed 3 years of court-mandated psychiatric evaluations, intercepted medical files, and a relentless smear campaign had left me broken, confused, and desperate for their approval. They had no idea that inside the inner lining of my service coat rested a sealed, classified Department of Defense flash drive, a weathered, leather-bound field log stamped with serial code TAC 809, and a signed affidavit from the late Master Sergeant Thomas Reed written hours before he succumbed to his injuries. And they certainly didn't know that sitting quietly in the back row, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, was a senior investigator from the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General, along with a heavily decorated gray-haired command sergeant major who knew exactly what happened in the Shuryok Valley on November 12th. If you want to see how absolute tactical discipline, cold forensic truth, and unyielding military honor tear down a multi-million-dollar web of family corruption, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on all notifications, and never miss an intense story where the truth claims its victory. To understand how my own brother ended up branding me a stolen valor coward in front of 82 high society guests at our mother's memorial, you have to look back 36 months to the night my life was shattered in a windswept mountain outpost in eastern Afghanistan. I was a captain assigned to a specialized signals intelligence team attached to a forward reconnaissance element. My team's mission wasn't sitting in safe command posts. It was intercepting high-frequency enemy transmissions, decoding local comms in real time, and accompanying combat patrols through narrow canyons where satellite signals failed. Julian, meanwhile, was a staff officer sitting at the secure regional logistics node 70 miles away in Jalalabad, overseeing private defense contracts for fuel, heavy transport, and perimeter maintenance. On the night of November 12th, my 5-person unit was ambushed along a rocky riverbed. Our lead vehicle was destroyed by a command-detonated mine, taking out our primary long-range radio. Master Sergeant Thomas Reed, a 22-year combat veteran and a father of 3, suffered severe shrapnel wounds to his chest and legs. Under heavy automatic fire from 2 fortified positions on the ridgeline, I dragged Master Sergeant Thomas Reed 80 yards through the dirt into a drainage trench, applied pressure dressings to his wounds, and used my tactical field radio to manually route an emergency medical evacuation request. Because standard channels were jammed by local interference, I had to route our priority extraction signal, Vanguard 4, directly through the logistics frequency managed by Major Julian Thorne's team. I spoke into the handset while rounds snapped through the mud wall above my head. Logistics control, this is Vanguard 4 actual. We have 2 urgent surgical casualties, requesting immediate air medevac to coordinates grid 8-2 Delta. Over. The earpiece crackled with static. Then my brother's voice came through, cold, flat, and unnervingly relaxed. Vanguard 4, logistics frequency is restricted for high-priority supply convoys. Reroute through standard medevac channels. Out. Julian, listen to me, I screamed over the deafening clatter of machine gun fire. Sergeant Reed is bleeding out. The main channel is jammed. Override the regional clearance. Authorize the helicopter now. There was a 5-second silence on the line, a silence that would echo in my mind for 3 straight years. Request denied, Captain. Maintain radio discipline, Julian said. The line went dead. Master Sergeant Reed died in that cold drainage trench 45 minutes later, holding my hand, his blood soaking into the front of my combat shirt. By the time a relief column reached our position 2 hours later, I had taken a rifle bullet through my right shoulder and was suffering from severe blood loss and hypothermia. When I woke up 3 weeks later at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, I expected an immediate military inquiry. I expected my brother to be stripped of his rank and court-martialed for refusing a life-saving medevac override. Instead, when I opened my eyes, my father and Julian were standing at the foot of my hospital bed. "You're awake, Clara," my father said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. "We've already filed the official paperwork. You are being medically retired due to severe post-traumatic stress and operational disorientation." I pushed myself up against the headboard, my shoulder burning beneath thick gauze wraps. "What are you talking about? Julian refused our emergency extraction. He killed Master Sergeant Reed. He shut down our radio frequency to keep his supply lines clear." Julian stepped forward, leaning over my bed with a calm, mocking smile. "You were delirious, Clara. You hallucinated the whole thing. The official after-action report states that your team wandered 3 miles off route into an unmapped danger zone without clearance. You panicked, abandoned your team sergeant, and ruined high-value comms equipment. Dad and I used our connections to make sure you got an honorable medical discharge instead of a general court-martial for criminal negligence." I stared at them in utter disbelief. "You lied on an official Department of Defense report?" "We preserved the Thorne family honor," my father interrupted, tapping his gold signet ring against the bedrail. "Julian is being promoted to lieutenant colonel next month. He is taking over as chief operating officer for our defense firm, Thorne Tactical Systems. If the board heard that his sister was a hysterical officer who lost her team sergeant in an unauthorized zone, it would destroy our contract bids with U.S. Central Command. You will keep quiet, collect your VA disability, and stay far away from Savannah." Over the next 3 years, they conducted a systematic campaign of psychological destruction. Whenever I tried to reach out to surviving members of my unit, I found their numbers disconnected or my letters returned unopened. My stepmother, Evelyn, filed a legal petition in Georgia claiming I was mentally incapacitated and unable to manage my share of my late birth mother's trust fund, attaching signed affidavits from a military doctor who had never spent more than 5 minutes evaluating me. They intercepted my personal mail, had my medical files routed through a private clinic owned by one of my father's former associates, and told our extended family that I was living in a delusional world, convincing myself I was a hero to suppress my own guilt. The breaking point came 5 months ago. My biological mother, Eleanor Thorne, the only person in that family who had ever truly loved me, passed away after a quiet battle with illness. Before she died, she sent me an encrypted voice message through a third-party app, whispering a single message: "Clara, check the iron lockbox inside the old boathouse at the Lake Oconee property. Your grandfather left something there before Julian seized the real estate assets." I didn't rush to Lake Oconee. I knew Julian had motion-activated cameras installed around all family properties. Instead, I played the long game. I let them believe their campaign had crushed me. I let them think I was isolated, broken, and helpless. I let them believe I was completely defeated right up until the afternoon of my memorial service. Now, standing in the center aisle of the Redwood Ballroom under the glare of 82 high society guests, Julian's voice boomed through the speakers once more. "Security," I said. "Remove her," Julian demanded, snapping his fingers at 2 private venue guards near the entrance. "She is disrupting a private memorial. My mother would be ashamed to see this mentally unstable woman standing here making a scene." The 2 guards stepped toward me, their arms outstretched to take hold of my elbows. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I simply adjusted my stance, turning my head to glare directly at the lead guard. "Lay a hand on me," I said, my voice low, sharp, and carrying the absolute authority of a combat officer, "and you will be committing a federal offense against an active Department of Veterans Affairs witness under federal subpoena. Look around the room, gentlemen." The lead guard paused, detecting the complete lack of fear in my posture. He glanced past me toward the back of the room. My father stood up from the front row, his face turning an angry, blotchy red. "Clara, stop this embarrassing spectacle right now. You are a disgraced former officer who failed her team. Have you no self-respect?" My stepmother, Evelyn, squeezed out another loud, dramatic sob. "Oh, Robert, she's going to ruin Eleanor's memory. Look at her. She's completely lost touch with reality. Someone call an ambulance." Julian smirked from the podium, leaning closer to the microphone. "See that, everyone? This is what combat delirium looks like. She actually believes she deserves that uniform. She never saved anyone in Afghanistan. She sat in a rear bunker, panicked under fire, and let Master Sergeant Reed bleed to death while she hid in a ditch." A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the rows. I saw retired officers shaking their heads. I saw family acquaintances whispering behind their hands. "Are you finished, Julian?" I asked quietly, taking 2 deliberate steps down the aisle. "I'm finished listening to your fabrications, sister," Julian spat. "Get out, now." "Then let's discuss TAC 890. The entire room seemed to grow deathly quiet. Julian's smirk didn't disappear immediately, but his knuckles turned white against the wooden edges of the podium. "What did you just say?" "I said TAC 890, I repeated, walking steadily toward the front, my dress shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood. "The master signal logbook serial number for the Regional Logistics Transmission Desk in Jalilabad on November 12th. The logbook that mysteriously vanished 24 hours after Sergeant Reed died." My father took a sharp step forward, his eyes narrowing into dark slits. "Clara, those operational records are classified military property. How did you—" "I said it was missing." I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound book secured with a tarnished steel lock. the only spot Julian forgot to inspect when he was busy transferring Mom's private accounts. Evelyn's sobbing instantly stopped. She stared at my father with a sudden look of pure panic. "That logbook proves nothing," Julian shouted, his tone losing his calm composure and rising to a sharp, defensive edge. "You forged it. You've spent 3 years making up stories because you can't live with the fact that you froze when it mattered." "I didn't forge the digital audio timestamps embedded in the DoD satellite relay, Julian," I said softly, pulling the black titanium flash drive from my pocket. "And I certainly didn't forge the sworn statement from the duty signal officer who was sitting 3 feet away from you in Jalalabad when I called in that emergency extraction." I turned toward the back of the ballroom. "Command Sergeant Major Vance, would you please step forward?" From the back row, the gray-haired man in the charcoal suit stood up. He straightened his jacket, revealing a row of active-duty ribbons pinned to his coat, and marched down the aisle with crisp, measured steps. Beside him, the senior investigator from the VA Inspector General's office opened a dark leather folder. Julian's face drained of color. His microphone caught his quick, shallow gasp. "Vance? What? Why are you here? You retired 2 years ago." "I retired because I couldn't stomach working under a staff officer who traded a soldier's life for a private defense contract bonus, Julian," Command Sergeant Major Vance said, his deep, resonant voice filling the ballroom without any amplification. "I preserved the original encrypted audio backup of your transmission on November 12th. I preserved it because Sergeant Reed served under my command for 6 years, and I knew the second I read your altered after-action report that you and your father were going to blame his death on your sister." The ballroom erupted into a storm of shocked gasps and frantic whispers. Retired military leaders in the front rows sat up straight, staring at my father in absolute horror. "Robert," one of the retired admirals called out, his voice sharp with disgust, "is this true? Did your son intentionally block an emergency evacuation?" "For an active combat team." "No, it's a setup," my father yelled, stepping in front of Julian as if to shield him from the crowd. "Vance is a bitter NCO. Clara is mentally unstable. This whole performance is a deliberate attack on Thorne Tactical Systems." "It's not an attack, Colonel Thorne," the VA Inspector General investigator announced loudly, walking up to the podium and placing a stack of legal papers onto the polished wood. The investigator turned to face the 82 guests, opening his folder. "For the past 14 months, Captain Clara Thorne has been working directly with the Office of the Inspector General in a federal undercover audit. We have verified that Major Julian Thorne and Colonel Robert Thorne systematically falsified combat logs, altered official casualty reports, and bribed civilian medical staff to declare Captain Clara mentally unfit." The investigator fixed his gaze directly on Julian. "Why?" "Because on November 12th, Major Julian Thorne had illegally redirected 3 armored support trucks carrying $8 million worth of classified electronic warfare equipment to an unverified private buyer outside Jalalabad. Acknowledging Captain Clara's emergency medevac call would have exposed the fact that his logistics team was actively monitoring an unauthorized transport route. He let Master Sergeant Reed die to avoid an immediate audit of his supply channels." Chaos broke out across the ballroom. Guests rose from their chairs in utter disgust, shaking their heads in disbelief. Several key corporate donors turned and immediately headed for the exit doors, shielding their faces from the venue cameras. Julian looked as if he were about to collapse. He took a shaky step back from the podium, pulling at his collar as if he couldn't catch his breath. Dad, do something. Call our attorneys. Call the senator." My father stood frozen, his mouth open, his eyes wide with horror. The powerful, untouchable Colonel Robert Thorne had been reduced to an old man standing in the glare of his own ruined reputation. "No attorney can undo this, Julian," I said, stepping right up to the front table. You stole my reputation. You stole my mother's final years by keeping me away from her with fraudulent court orders. You let a decorated combat leader die in the dirt so you could drive luxury cars and build a fake defense empire. But worst of all, you mistook my patience for weakness. I unpinned the Purple Heart from my dress uniform and placed it gently on top of my mother's rosewood casket. I didn't earn this medal because I survived enemy fire, Julian. I earned it because I survived you. Two armed federal marshals entered through the side doors of the ballroom, the steel handcuffs on their belts catching the light. Julian Thorne, Robert Thorne, you are under arrest for federal conspiracy, obstruction of justice, military procurement fraud, and involuntary manslaughter in connection with the death of Master Sergeant Thomas Reed. Stand away from the podium and put your hands behind your backs. My stepmother Evelyn screamed in panic, dropping to the carpet and weeping uncontrollably as the marshals moved in. Julian tried to pull his arms back, sobbing openly as the steel cuffs clicked around his wrists. "Clara, please, tell them this is a mistake. We're family. We're blood." "Family doesn't abandon their own in the dark," Command Sergeant Major Vance said coldly as he guided Julian toward the side exit. My father said nothing. As the marshals secured his hands behind him, he offered me one last look. Not of anger, not of pride, but the cold, crushing realization that everything he had spent his life building had turned to dust in a single night. As the room cleared and the flashing red and blue lights of law enforcement vehicles reflected against the wet glass windows of the St. Clair Hotel, I stood alone beside my mother's casket. The rain outside tapped softly against the window panes, cool, clear, and washing away 3 years of toxic lies. I took a deep, clear breath, felt the heavy burden finally lift from my shoulders, and knew that Master Sergeant Reed could finally rest in peace.